Hello, we are going to be talking about solving a system of equations today by graphing. So this is where we're going to have a graph and we're going to have our system of equations, which is going to be two equations, and they're both going to be graphed. And we have to determine what is the solution to that system of equations. So to begin with, we want to make sure that we remember that the solution to a system of equations is going to be that part where those two lines are going to intersect. So a system of equations is going to include two equations that represent two lines on the graph, and then the solution is going to be where they intersect. So if we look at this graph over here, we can see we have our two equations here. This one's going to represent this line, and then this equation is going to represent this line. And when we're looking at what the solution would be, we're going to look at where do these two lines cross. So if we were to look at both of these lines, and I'm just going to trace them. This is going to be our first line, and this will be our second. And we're going to see exactly where do these points cross. And they would cross right about at this point. So we could say the ordered pair, this would be 1 on the x-axis, and then it would be about -6 on the y. That would be our solution to this system of equations because that is the point that they intersect. So we're going to take a look at some examples, but we're going to go to the activity itself. And so this is asking us to solve this system of equations by graphing, and we're going to first graph the equations and then we're going to type the solution. So we have these two equations that we're going to be working with. And we have to remember too that when we're graphing equations, that we are working in slope-intercept form. So we have y equals mx plus b. And our slope is going to be represented by the number that's in front of x or in place for m. And that's going to tell us also what the movement of our graph is going to be. And then b, it doesn't always have to be plus b, it could be minus. This is going to be where our y-intercept is. And this can also represent our beginning or where do we start our graph? Where are we going to place that first point? And so when we look at this first equation, we have y equals -x minus 7. We can see here that this in front of x, there's not a number, but we know that if there's not a number, we can say that this is an imaginary 1. So our slope of our line is going to be a -1. And then our y-intercept is going to be this number that's in place for b. And so we would say our y-intercept would be a -7. Remember that that sign is going to go with that term as well. So when we go to graph this, we're going to first make sure that we select the correct equation that we're working with. So if we're working with the y equals 2/3 x minus 2, we'd want to make sure that this purple equation is selected. But since we're working with -x minus 7, we'll make sure that the orange equation is selected. And we have to first start off by placing our point. Where do we start our graph? And so our y-intercept is going to tell us that that's going to be where we're going to start. And then our slope is a -1. So remember with slope, our slope is going to be our rise or our fall over our run. And so if it's a positive number, it would be our rise. If it's a negative, it's going to be fall. So in this case, we are going to be falling because it is a -1. I'm going to write this over here. And we have to remember that if we have a whole number, we can always write this as 1 over an imaginary 1. And so when we start this graph at -7, our next point is going to be placed by going down 1 because we're falling 1 place, and then we're going to run 1 place. And we always run to the right. So this would be our first graph. This would be our graph for y equals -x minus 7. The next one that we're going to look at is we're going to look at the y equals 2/3 x minus 2. So I will clear these out of the way. Y equals 2/3 x minus 2. And again, we're going to be using our slope and our y-intercept to show our starting point where we're going to begin our graph, and then also where our next point is going to be plotted using the slope. So the slope is going to be in front of x, and so we're going to use this whole fraction. Okay, it's got to keep the fraction. We got to use this to tell us what our slope is. And then our y-intercept is going to be this number that's in place of b. We have to keep that sign as well. So our y-intercept would be at -2. And when we look at this, the y-intercept is also going to be the place that we're going to start our graph. And so our first point is going to go, and we have to make sure too that right now we're still selected on the orange equation, the y equals -x minus 7. So we have to switch this over to the purple so that we can graph the second line. So we're going to say, and when we say that we have y-intercept of -2, that means our x is 0. We're not going left or right at all. We're just going down 2 places. And so we're going to start at 0. We're going down 1, 2 places, and that's going to be our first point of this graph. Our next point, we have to remember that our slope is, again, our rise or our fall over our run. So if it's a positive number, we're going to be rising. If it's a negative number, we're going to be falling. So in this case, we have a fraction. So it's going to tell us it's a positive fraction. So we are rising. We're going to rise 2 places, and then we're going to run 3 places. So from this point, okay, we're going to go up 2 places, 1, 2, and then we're going to go over 1, 2, 3 places and plot our next point. So now we have both of our equations graphed. We have both of them, and we can clearly see where do these 2 lines cross. And when we look at these lines, we can see that they're going to intersect right about at this point. And so then we want to grab that ordered pair. Okay, we got to start with our x. So we're going to start here, and this is going to go over to -3. And then we would go down to -4 for our y. So this is going to tell us what point do these lines cross, and we would say at -3 and then -4. All right, let's try another example of this with graphing. So we want to solve the system of equations by graphing, and so we have to look at each of these equations separately, okay? And so I'm going to scroll down just a little bit so we can see the graph, and we can see that y equals -7/3 x plus 3 is in the green, and then y equals -1/3 x minus 3 is in the orange. So we're going to say that with this one, again, we're dealing with slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b. So our slope is this number in front of x, and then our y-intercept is going to be what's in place for b. So we're going to look at these separately. We're going to look at both of these equations separately and graph them. So let's start with y equals -7/3 x plus 3. Now my slope is going to be this number that is in front of this number that's in front of x. So we're going to take this fraction. We have to make sure we include the sign of negative. So our slope is -7/3. And again, our slope is going to tell us our rise or our fall over our run. And if it's a positive number, it's going to be telling us we're going to rise. And if it's a negative, it's going to tell us we're going to fall. So in this case, we have a -7/3. So we're going to fall 7 places, and then we're going to run 3. And then our y-intercept is going to be this number that's at the end, or in this case, it would be a plus 3. So this is where we're going to start. And with our y-intercept as an ordered pair, we know that y-intercept, our x will be 0, and then our y is going to be this positive 3. So that's where we're going to place our first point, is at 0, 3. Now, again, we want to make sure that we select the correct equation. So we want to make sure, since we're dealing with y equals -7/3 x plus 3, that we have this green equation selected. So start at 0, and then we're going to go up 1, 2, 3 places, and that's going to be our first point. Our second point is going to be determined by the slope of the line. So in this case, our slope is -7/3. So we're going to be falling 7 places. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're going to run 3 places. You always run to the right. So we're going to go 1, 2, 3, and that's going to be our second point. So this is the equation for the green equation, or y equals -7/3 x plus 3. And now we're going to move on to the second equation of y equals -1/3 x minus 3. So our slope is going to be this number that's in front of x. We have to keep that sign as well, so it'll be -1/3. So this is going to tell us our slope is going to be our rise or our fall over our run. And so in this case, we have a -1/3. This is going to tell us that we're going to fall 1 place and then run 3. And then our b is going to be, or our y-intercept is going to be a -3. We have to make sure we keep that sign, because that's going to tell us that our y-intercept is going to be at 0 and then a -3. Unlike the last equation, it was at a 0, +3. In this case, it is going to be a -3. So this is going to be where we're going to start this graph. And then since we were dealing with the green equation, this is still selected. So we want to jump over and make sure the orange equation is selected. We're going to place our first point at 0 and then go down to -3. And then our next point is going to be determined by the slope. So that's going to tell us we're going to fall 1 place, and we're going to run 1, 2, 3 places. Now we can kind of see, where does these two graphs, where do they cross? And they cross right at this point right here. And so then we can kind of pick out that ordered pair by saying, okay, we're starting at 0 on our x-axis. To line up with that point, we're going to go over 1, 2, 3 places. So that's going to be our x. And then our y is going to be, we're going to go down 1, 2, 3, 4 places. So that's a -4. And be sure too to make sure that you keep the sign correct, because if, for instance, if we put 3 +4, that's going to give us a different answer. That's actually going to tell us that our intersecting point would be right about here, and that's not the case. So that's where we want to make sure we double check those signs, make sure that we have the positive signs with the correct numbers and the negative signs with the correct numbers. And so we would put this one in. All right, let's take a look at another one. So we're still solving a system of equations. Where do those two lines cross? And so we're going to be working with slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b. Our m is our slope, and our b is our y-intercept. And so the first equation that we're going to look at is kind of this darker blue equation. Okay, we've got y equals 2x minus 2, and then the lighter blue is x equals 4. So we're going to start with the darker blue, the y equals 2x minus 2. So looking at this equation, we can see that our slope is this number in front of x, or 2. So our slope is equal to 2, and our slope is our rise or our fall over our run. This is going to tell us the movement that we're going to see in the graph. So if it's a rise, it means that we have a positive number, and if it's a fall, we have a negative. So in this case, we have a positive 2, and so we're going to be rising 2 places. But since this is a whole number, it doesn't really exactly tell us what the run is. So remember, with whole numbers, we can write this as a ratio of 2 over 1. That's the same thing as saying the whole number 2. And then our y-intercept, or where do we start this graph, is going to be at negative 2. And so to start, we would go 0 places to the left or the right, and then we're going to go down 2 places. So we have to make sure when we're graphing this, make sure that the correct equation is selected. And so start at 0. We're going down 2 places to place our first point to start. And then our slope is 2 over 1. So we're going to go up 1, 2, and we're going to go over 1 place, and that's going to be our next point. All right, and then the next graph we have, it's a little bit different. This is where we have x equals 4. We don't have this in slope-intercept form, right? This is just telling us that our graph is x equals 4. So what this means actually is when we plot our points on this graph, for every value that we have of, oops, let me go back to here. There we go. So for x equals 4, for every value that we have of y, our answer is 4. And so what this means is that we're going to place a point at, you can place a point right at 4 on the x-axis, but then your next point could just be anywhere. It's going to be a vertical line, okay? And what this actually is telling us is that our slope is undefined, okay? It's just a vertical line. It's not a 0 slope because it's not a flat line. It's not a horizontal line. It's a vertical line that goes straight up and down forever. So then we can see, once we've plotted this, we can see that our point that these two equations are going to meet are going to be right about here. And so when we grab this ordered pair, we can say, okay, so our x is going to be 4, and we would know that too because since the other equation is x equals 4, that means that for every point on that particular line, it's going to be x is 4. And so these equations are going to cross at the point where x is also equal to 4. And then our y would be lined up with positive 6. So 4 and then a positive 6. All right, and then we would go put this in as our answer. And we'll move on to another question. Well, let's take a look at, maybe jump a little bit, see if we can find another type of question. So in this one, again, we're solving systems of equations. So I'm going to scroll down a little bit. We've got the purple equation is y equals negative 2/3 x plus 2. And then the lighter blue is y equals 1/2 x minus 5. So when we look at this, we've got our slope-intercept form of y equals mx plus b. The number that's going to be in front of x or in place of m is going to represent our slope. And then the number that's in place of b or plus b, could be plus or minus, is going to be our y-intercept. So we're going to look at the purple equation first. We've got y equals negative 2/3 x plus 2. So our slope is going to be this number that's in front of x, the whole thing, including the sign. So this would be our slope is negative 2/3. And our slope, we remember, is our rise or our fall over our run. So if it's a positive number, it means we're going to rise. And if it's a negative number, it means it's going to fall. And so in this case, we've got a -2. We're going to be falling 2 places and then running 3 places. And then our y-intercept is going to be at +2. And so this is going to tell us where are we going to start our graph. And that's going to be, remember, if it's a y-intercept, the x is always 0. And so this would be at 0, and then a +2 would be our first point. So make sure that the correct equation is selected. So in this case, I want to make sure the purple is selected, not the blue. I'm going to start at 0, and I'm going to go up 2 places to a +2. My next point is determined by the slope of the line. So I've got a -2/3. So I'm going to be falling 2 places and then running 3 places. You always run to the right. You always want to make sure that you go to the right, and that's going to show you that this line is negative as well. All right, so let's go on to the light blue equation next. So y equals 1/2 x minus 5. Our slope of this line is going to be 1/2, that number in front of x, a +1/2. So that's going to tell us when we're determining our slope if it's positive or negative, are we going to rise or are we going to fall? Well, we know that if our number is a positive, it means we're going to be rising. So in this case, we're going to rise 1 place and we're going to run 2 places. And then our y-intercept is going to be what's in place for b. So we've got a -5. We have to keep that negative sign with it because that's going to tell us that our x is at 0, and then our y is going to be at -5. So that's going to be our first point. So when we were working with the purple equation, now we have to make sure we go back and we select the blue. So we're going to select the blue equation of y equals 1/2 x minus 5. Start at 0, 0, and we're going to go down to a -5. Our second point is determined by the slope, so we know that we're going to be rising 1 place, running 2 places to the right. And now we can clearly see, where do these lines cross? What is the solution to my system of equations? And it's going to be right at this point right here where these 2 points cross. So I start at 0, 0. I would go to +6 on the x-axis, and then I would go down to a -2 on the y. And that's exactly where these 2 points are going to cross, and that would be the solution to my system of equations. So it would be at 6 and a -2. We're going to look at one more equation here where we have x plus y is equal to -5, and then we have y is equal to 5x plus 1. So we're going to look at the first one first, of x plus y. And when we look at this one is not written in slope-intercept form. So it's going to be a little bit difficult to determine what is the slope and what is the y-intercept when we're looking at slope-intercept form. And we can see clearly that our slope is m and that our y-intercept is our b, but this is not going to show us clearly what our slope is and what our y-intercept is. So what we want to do is we want to take this equation and we want to rewrite it in slope-intercept form, okay? Which means that we have to get our y by itself. And so we're going to somehow move this x to the other side of the equal sign. And how do we move it? We're going to be using inverse operations. So if we have a positive x, we're going to be subtracting x from both sides. And this would cross out for us, cancel for us. We bring this down, y equals. Now, when we look at this side of the equal sign, we have -5 and a -x, but one of those terms has a variable, one of them does not. And so we cannot combine those terms together. We would just simply rewrite this as -x minus 5. So now we have this in slope-intercept form, and we can see now what is our slope? What is our y-intercept of this line going to be? And we have to remember, if there is not a number written in front of the variable, we could say that that's just the number 1. So our slope is a -1. So we know that this is our rise or our fall. And since this is a negative number, this is going to tell us that this is going to be where we're going to fall with our slope. So now we have a -1 as our whole number, but remember, as a whole number, we can write this as a ratio over the number 1 as well. And then our y-intercept is going to be at a -5. So we know that our x is 0 and our y is -5. So when we place our first point, well, first we have to make sure we have the correct equation selected. So we want to make sure the green equation is selected, even though it's written differently in the green equation than what we have rewrote it as. We're still going to make sure that green equation is selected. And then our first point is going to start at 0. We're going to be going down to a -5. Our second point is going to be determined by the slope, and so that's going to tell us we're going to fall one place and run to the right one place as well. All right, and then, so that's our first equation. That's the graph to our first equation. So now we can move on to the second one, which is written a little bit more friendly, where we can see we have y equals 5x plus 1. This is written in slope-intercept form, so we can clearly see the slope is a +5. And so our slope is our rise or our fall over our run. So this would be a positive for rise and negative for fall. And so in this case, we have a +5. So that's going to tell us that we are rising 5 places. And then as that whole number, we can write that over the number 1 as well as a ratio. So we would be rising 5 places. We're going to run 1 place. And then our y-intercept is going to be at +1. Or we could say this is going to be at 0, +1. So now we want to make sure we've selected the correct equation that we're going to be graphing. So right now we're working with the green, so we want to make sure we select this light blue of y equals negative, or y equals 5x plus 1. Our first point is going to be, we're going to start at 0, 0. We're going to go up to a +1. And then our next point is going to be determined by the slope. So we're going to be rising 5 places, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're going to run to the right 1 place. And now we can see, where do these points, where do these lines cross? We can see that they're going to cross right about here. And then we have to determine the ordered pair. Where does this point line up with the x-axis and the y-axis? We can see it lines up with about a -1 on the x and then a -4 on the y. And that's what we would place into our answers, -1 and a -4.